Welcome to Storytimer at Large. Anne Kline. Anne Kline was born Anne Miller in Pennsylvania. She was the oldest of her siblings, and they all grew up on a farm. She finished high school and college there. Anne earned a degree in business education. She and her husband moved to Indiana for jobs at Alcoa in southern Indiana. They settled down to a quiet life in Newburgh, Indiana. In 1970, she left the accounting department at Alcoa to teach business math courses at Lockyer Business College in Evansville. In 1973, she was considering starting a family soon with her husband. They were looking forward to all that 1973 might bring their way. The old Vanderburgh County Courthouse is a stately old building in downtown Evansville. It was constructed in 1891 and remained active until 1968. Costly repairs and a growing community made a new modern courthouse a necessity, but the beautiful Beaux-Arts style building was much loved by the community, and efforts were made to save it. In 1973, Lockyer Business College had set up temporary classrooms in the old Evansville courthouse due to a fire at their school the year before. Mrs. Anne Kline, a 26-year-old business math and accounting teacher, had finished a class and was alone in her basement classroom. Just after 3 p.m. on January 18, 1973, Anne Kline had just met with a student. As he was walking up the stairs, he heard screaming, but assumed it was just other students sort of horsing around, and didn't turn back to find out what the screaming was. It seemed so out of the norm that he just, like anyone would, you would think, oh, it must be somebody playing a joke on somebody. The screaming was actually Anne being murdered. Anne Kline was stabbed 19 times in the chest in an adjacent alcove close to the nearest exit to her classroom on January 18, 1973. She bled to death within a few minutes. She was very near the exit. Was she fleeing from her attacker? Her purse was still in her classroom. Her jewelry was left on her body. Robbery was not a motive. She had not been raped. Killing for the sake of killing seems to be the motive here. Anne was stabbed 19 times. 19 stab wounds allows for a lot of chances for a killer to cut himself on a slippery knife. Did he leave behind any of his own blood on the dress of the victim? She was described in newspaper articles as wearing a blue dress with orange and yellow flowers that day. Is it still in an evidence locker somewhere? News articles also described investigators looking into the fingernails of Anne and scraping underneath the nails. Did they save that evidence? Could it still reveal DNA of the killer? At the time, they were trying to determine the skin color of the killer, but they were unable to do so. And we don't know if she was able to touch the person who was assaulting her. And stabbing her. So, I mean, she might have, but maybe not. Anne also had hair and lint clutched in her hand when her body was found. The hair was determined at the time to be her own. No one saw a blood-covered suspect leaving. There were no footprints showing which way he left. One would guess that he simply left through those same closest doors there on the 5th Street side of the building. Was that area fairly deserted around 3 p.m. in January? It's not rush hour in the morning or the evening. It's not lunchtime. It might have been a very easy walk right out to the parked car on the street. That exit led out to 5th Street, or a person could quickly make their way to Vine Street or Covert Street, the other two adjacent streets. Who is a likely suspect? Robbery wasn't the motive. Anne didn't really have any enemies. Students at the school were questioned. There was no one that stood out as a disgruntled student of hers. Um, but let's look a little wider. Who was killing people just for the sake of killing people around Evansville in January of 1973? I think Jeffery Lynn Hand could be a possible suspect here. Jeffery Lynn Hand was working in Evansville sporadically in early 1973. I don't know where or if he was working in January. He sometimes did construction work, we've found. Were there any projects in or around the courthouse that he could have been working on? That's very likely. The old jail nearby was being renovated by Gregory Wolfe. Gregory Wolfe had signed a lease of $1 per year in 1972 with the provision that he renovate the building. He taught photography there and planned to open a gallery of sorts there. Students of his were volunteering to scrape paint and do other work in the old jail. Other restoration projects were happening inside the courthouse itself. The Conrad Baker Foundation was in charge of the upkeep and restoration of the courthouse property. In February and March, Jeffery Lynn Hand worked at Whirlpool before he was fired. He worked at George Koch and in May and June and was fired from there as well. But where was he on January 18th, 1973? We know where Hand was on September 15th, 1972. He killed Indiana State University student Pamela Milam that day. Her murder investigation would be cold for decades until Parabon Nanolabs solved it through DNA analysis in 2019. Jeffery Lynn Hand's sons graciously agreed to give samples of their DNA so that the Milam family might have some small measure of closure after all these years. In June of 1973, Hand stabbed and shot a man to death and kidnapped the young man's wife. The murder of Jeffrey Wayne Thomas was incredibly brutal and senseless. His hands were tied behind his back and he was shot in the face with a .22 caliber weapon. He was stabbed 8 times in the chest. Finally, his throat was slashed and his jugular vein was severed. His wife, Carol Thomas, was lucky to escape with her life. Robbery was not a motive. Hand was sentenced to a mental institution for that murder. In August of 1976, he was released on a technicality. There are other murders between then and Hand's death in 1978 in January that look like they could also be the work of Jeffery Lynn Hand. Did Hand commit other crimes between these 2 murders in September of 1972 and June of 1973? It's entirely possible. Does a person who is capable of murdering strangers in such brutal ways simply stop? Well, I don't think so. One thing we know about serial killers is that's all they think about. That's all they want to do. They don't stop. The timing and the proximity of Anne Kline's murder to Jeffery Lynn Hand's time working in and around Evansville is noteworthy here. Who was Jeffery Lynn Hand? Jeffery Lynn Hand attended Washington High School in Washington, Indiana, and graduated in 1967. He married a 15-year-old girl that year. By 1969, they had split up and each remarried other people. He served in the Air Force in Vietnam as an airman first class. I have not found the years that he served. He was back in the United States sometime in 1972. We know without a doubt that in September of 1972, he abducted, raped, and murdered Pamela Milam in Terre Haute, Indiana. He tied her up and put an excessive amount of tape over her nose and mouth and left her in the trunk of her car. He parked the car back in the campus of Indiana State University. Her father found her there after her roommate and friends became concerned when she was missing. In 2019, as we said before, Parabon Nanolabs used DNA technology to identify her killer definitively as Jeffery Lynn Hand. He suspected in murdering Vicki Lynn Harrell of Bloomington in August of 1972. That would have been just 1 month before Pamela Milam was killed. Vicki Lynn Harrell was found outside McCormick's Creek State Park. She was raped, stabbed, and strangled, and had what looked to some investigators somewhat like the letters K and N carved into her chest. She was nude and face down in a puddle. Her murder has never been solved. Jeffrey Lynn Hand is also suspected in the murder of Linda Sue Ferry in Lafayette in August of 1977. She was strangled and left in the trunk of her car, very similarly to Pamela Milam. If Hand is guilty of these suspected murders in a string of college towns, could he have been cruising for victims in college towns where he would have an abundance of young women to choose from? That's quite possible. Think about the atmosphere of a college. Any young person in 1973 could just go and hang out on campus. You could walk into nearly any building. A person could hang around in a classroom building without appearing to loiter. They would look like a student just killing time between classes. They might look like they were simply waiting for a friend. Colleges and college towns were a preferred hunting ground for Ted Bundy. I think that Jeffrey Lynn Hand also had a preference for this particular setting. If Hand is guilty of these college town murders, he drove around a lot. Do we have any record of Jeffrey Lynn Hand driving around for no real reason? Well, in the summer of 1973, when he picked up the Thomases, they were newlyweds hitchhiking back from Chicago, where they had visited friends and family. They lived in Evansville. Jeffrey Lynn Hand picked them up near Terre Haute. He had just recently been fired from 2 different Evansville jobs. What was he doing in Terre Haute? He had 2 different handguns and a 9-inch knife with him. He had 2 different cars at the place that he was staying. Why was that? He can't hold a job, but there are 2 cars there on a farm in Gibson County where he's living at the time. Anne Kline could have been a victim of Jeffrey Lynn Hand. But the 1970s saw a huge rise in violent crime. It also could have been a lot of people. Hopefully, evidence has been preserved in this case. There are 19 chances that the killer cut himself on a slippery knife while inflicting 19 stab wounds. Was Anne's dress preserved? Can a DNA profile of the killer be found? If you have information about the murder of Anne Kline, please call the Evansville, Indiana Police Department Adult Investigations Unit at 812-436-7979. Rest in peace, Anne Kline.